Drop the wallet. Drop it now. Get on the ground. The yellow plastic taser left Officer Cody Bramlett's belt approximately 1.5 seconds after Wendell McKinley's right hand began to move toward the back pocket of his jeans. The back pocket. Officer Bramlett had just 16 seconds earlier ordered him to produce ID from Wendell McKinley, 58 years old, 6'2", 210 pounds, wearing a faded blue flannel shirt over a gray Carhartt t-shirt and a baseball cap with a small American flag pin on the brim, did not have time to fully process the order, the contradiction, or the bright yellow object now pointed at the center of his chest from approximately 7 feet away. He had time, in the half-second remaining to him, to register the trigger pull. The twin barbs caught him on the left side of his ribcage and the upper right of his abdomen. The 5-second cycle of the X26P taser at full charge, 50,000 volts at 0.0036 amperes, calibrated to override the central nervous system's voluntary motor control, dropped Wendell McKinley to the concrete of the Phillips 66 station off Sharon Amity Road in suburban Charlotte, North Carolina, with the controlled rigidity of a fallen oak. His head, which had been turned slightly to the left as he reached for his wallet, struck the concrete at an angle that the responding paramedics would later describe as approximately 12 degrees off perpendicular. The sound it made was a flat, hollow knock that the cashier inside the convenience store, a young woman named Crystal Mendoza, would later say she felt in her own teeth. Wendell McKinley's leather wallet, half pulled from his back pocket, slid approximately 3 feet across the concrete and came to rest against the curb of pump number 4. The Medal of Honor case in the inside pocket of his flannel shirt, a small navy blue leatherette box that he had been carrying with him for the past 9 days while he traveled between Charlotte and Washington for a Veterans Affairs ceremony scheduled for the following Tuesday, was dislodged in the fall. The case popped open on impact. The medal, a 5-pointed gold star suspended from a sky blue ribbon embroidered with 13 white stars, came partially out of the case. The ribbon caught the late afternoon Carolina sunlight at exactly the angle that drew, in the seconds after Wendell McKinley hit the ground, the attention of the 4 other customers at the gas station, the cashier inside the store, the elderly white man pumping gas at pump number 2, the teenage girl recording on her phone from pump number 6, and, approximately 3 minutes and 47 seconds later, Police Chief Anthony Coleman, who had been driving past the gas station on his way home from a community meeting at the Pleasant Grove AME Zion Church, and who had seen the cruiser's flashing lights from Sharon Amity Road, pulled into the station, walked toward the scene at the unhurried pace of a man who had been a police officer for 33 years, registered the situation in approximately 2 seconds, and made, on the spot, in front of 19 witnesses and 7 cell phone cameras, a decision that would end Officer Cody Bramlett's career in policing before the ambulance carrying Wendell McKinley pulled out of the parking lot. Sergeant First Class Wendell Mack McKinley, United States Army, retired, was one of approximately 63 living recipients of the Medal of Honor in the United States of America. He had been born on October 14, 1967, in Gastonia, North Carolina, the third of 5 children of a textile mill worker and a domestic. He had enlisted in the United States Army in 1985 at the age of 17. He had served in the Army for 26 years. He had completed the Special Forces Qualification Course in 1992 at Fort Bragg. He had been deployed 11 times across his career, twice to the Balkans in the mid-1990s, once to East Africa in 2000, 4 times to Iraq, and 4 times to Afghanistan. He had been wounded in combat 7 times, 3 Purple Hearts in Iraq, 4 in Afghanistan. He had retired honorably in 2012 at the age of 44. He had married a teacher named Constance Hartwell in 1994. They had 2 daughters, Imani, now 28 and a pediatric nurse in Atlanta, and Yolanda, 24 and a graduate student at UNC Chapel Hill. He worked, since 2017, as the Director of Veteran Outreach for a small nonprofit in Charlotte that helped recently discharged service members navigate the Department of Veterans Affairs disability claims process. He attended services at Pleasant Grove AME Zion Church most Sundays with his wife. He had not, in the 13 years since his retirement, ever told anyone outside his immediate family the specific details of what had happened in eastern Afghanistan on the morning of July 13, 2008. In the village of Wanat, in the Wagle Valley of Nuristan Province, where Combat Outpost Kyler had been overrun by approximately 200 insurgent fighters, and where Wendell McKinley had, in the course of approximately 3 hours of close-quarters combat, sustained shrapnel wounds, gunshot wounds, and after his fire team leader had been killed in the opening minutes of the engagement, single-handedly held a perimeter position at the southern edge of the outpost while moving 9 wounded American soldiers, one at a time, across approximately 40 meters of exposed terrain under sustained enemy fire to a defensible position from which they could be evacuated by helicopter. He had refused medical evacuation himself until the last of the wounded had been moved. He had passed out from blood loss at the medevac landing zone. He had woken up 4 days later at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany. His Medal of Honor citation, signed by the President of the United States in a White House ceremony, 3 years later, had described his actions as demonstrating gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his own life above and beyond the call of duty. He did not, on the afternoon of the gas station incident, have any reason to be carrying the Medal of Honor case on his person. He carried it because the previous Friday afternoon, in the kitchen of his brick ranch house in East Charlotte, his wife Constance had asked him whether he had finished arranging the small detail of the upcoming VA ceremony, at which he had agreed reluctantly to speak briefly about his experience for the benefit of newly enrolled VA mental health program participants. She had told him gently that the medal needed to be authenticated in a brief administrative review at the regional VA office downtown before the ceremony, and that he should bring the case with him the next time he was running errands in that direction. He had put the case in the inside pocket of his flannel shirt the following Monday morning. He had been carrying it for 9 days. He had stopped, on the afternoon of the incident, at the Phillips 66 station off Sharon Amity Road because his wife's Honda Civic was running low on gas, and he was driving it that afternoon while she had taken his 4Runner to a dental appointment. He had pumped $12.40 of regular unleaded into the Civic. He had gone inside the convenience store to buy a Snapple iced tea, peach, his usual, and a small bag of unsalted peanuts. He had paid with cash. He had returned to the parking lot at 4:47 p.m. He had been walking back toward the Civic when he had heard a voice from approximately 15 feet behind him say, in the tense and slightly elevated register of a young officer who had not yet learned how to lower his own adrenaline, "Sir, can I talk to you for a minute?" Officer Cody Bramlett was 26 years old, white, 6'1", 195 pounds, and had been a sworn officer of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department for 3 years and 4 months. He had grown up in Concord, North Carolina, the son of a long-haul trucker and a hospital billing administrator. He had completed the CMPD's basic law enforcement training program at the age of 23. He had, in his 3 years on patrol, accumulated 9 civilian complaints filed through the department's internal affairs office, 4 for excessive force, 3 for racial profiling, and 2 for unprofessional language. All 9 had been resolved without disciplinary action. The 2 most serious, an incident in 2023 involving a black college student named Marcus Hightower, who had been stopped for matching the description of a robbery suspect and who had subsequently been hospitalized with a separated shoulder, and an incident in early 2024 involving an elderly Latino man named Eduardo Ramos, who had been stopped for suspicious activity while watering his own front lawn, had been reviewed and closed by an internal affairs lieutenant who would later, when the federal investigation began, be discovered to have been a personal friend of Officer Bramlett's father since their high school years in Concord. He had, however, by every visible indication available to him on the afternoon of the gas station incident, no reason to believe he was at any imminent risk of consequence. He had pulled into the Phillips 66 station at 4:46 p.m. on routine patrol. He had not been responding to a call. There had been no call. The dispatch logs, which would be subpoenaed within 36 hours by federal investigators and which would prove definitive in the proceedings that followed, showed no calls for service from the Sharon Amity Road corridor between 4:30 and 5 p.m. that afternoon. Officer Bramlett had seen Wendell McKinley walking out of the convenience store as he had pulled into the station. He had registered, in the half-second of his initial visual processing, a tall black man in a flannel shirt and a baseball cap holding a paper bag. He had decided, on the basis of no information beyond that visual processing, to make contact. He had stepped out of his cruiser. He had walked toward Wendell McKinley, with his hand resting as a matter of his routine practice, on the grip of his service weapon. He had said the phrase about wanting to talk. Wendell McKinley had stopped walking. He had turned around. He had given Officer Bramlett the small, professional, slightly weary nod that he gave to most people he did not know and had no particular reason to engage with. He had said, "Yes, officer. How can I help you?" What had happened in the next 63 seconds would, when the body camera footage was eventually released to the public, 72 hours later be analyzed frame by criminal defense attorneys, use of force experts, journalists, retired law enforcement officials, and, with particular pain, by Constance McKinley, who would refuse to watch the footage until 11 months later, when she would finally watch it once in the office of her therapist and would never watch it again. Officer Bramlett had asked Wendell McKinley for his identification. Wendell McKinley had asked calmly what the reason for the stop was. Officer Bramlett had told him there had been a call about a suspect matching his description, attempting to tamper with the ATM inside the convenience store approximately 10 minutes earlier. Wendell McKinley had said calmly that he had been inside the store buying iced tea and peanuts, and that the cashier could verify this. He had reached, slowly, for his back pocket to produce his wallet. Officer Bramlett had said in a voice that had risen in pitch and volume by approximately 20% in the 4 seconds since the conversation began, "Drop the wallet. Drop it now. Get on the ground." The contradiction in the order, "Reach for the ID. Drop the wallet. Get on the ground," was the kind of contradiction that, in the literature of use of force training, had been identified for 2 decades as a primary contributing factor in officer-involved injuries and deaths, in the absence of any underlying threat from the civilian involved. Wendell McKinley, 26 years a soldier, trained for 26 years in the rapid resolution of contradictory orders under stress, had, in the half-second remaining to him before the taser barbs caught him, made the only decision available to him. He had attempted to comply with all 3 orders simultaneously by slowly withdrawing the wallet from his pocket with his fingers visibly extended away from his body, with the intention of placing it on the ground and lowering himself to a kneeling position. He had not completed the motion. The taser had fired. The barbs had caught him. He had gone down. The teenage girl at pump number 6 was named Madison Patel. She was 16 years old. She had been recording on her phone since approximately the moment Officer Bramlett had first raised his voice. The recording would be 2 minutes and 11 seconds long. It would be uploaded to her TikTok account from her phone within 4 minutes of the incident, while Officer Bramlett was still standing over Wendell McKinley with the spent taser cartridge in his hand. By the time the ambulance arrived at the gas station at 4:53 p.m., the video had been viewed approximately 43,000 times. By the time Chief Anthony Coleman pulled his unmarked Ford Explorer into the Phillips 66 parking lot at 4:51 p.m., the video had not yet gone viral. But Madison Patel had already done what she had done, and the Medal of Honor case had already popped open on the concrete. And the sky blue ribbon embroidered with 13 white stars had already caught the late afternoon Carolina sunlight at exactly the angle that was about to make this the most consequential traffic stop in the air. Recent history of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. Chief Anthony Coleman was 61 years old, a third-generation Charlotte native, and the first black chief of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. In the department's 165-year history, he had been appointed to the position 3 years earlier after a national search. He had spent the previous 19 years as a deputy chief and assistant chief in the department, and the 11 years before that as a patrol officer, detective, and sergeant. He had been the keynote speaker at the community meeting at Pleasant Grove AME, Zion Church that afternoon, where he had spoken for 37 minutes about a new community policing initiative the department was rolling out in 7 neighborhoods across the city. He had taken questions for another 45 minutes. He had been driving home alone in his unmarked Ford Explorer on Sharon Amity Road when he had seen the flashing blue lights of a CMPD cruiser at the Phillips 66 station. He had taken the next right turn. He had pulled into the parking lot at 4:51 p.m. He had stepped out of his Explorer in plain clothes, a navy suit with a white shirt, no tie, the small CMPD lapel pin he wore at community events. He had walked toward the scene at the pace of a man who had been a police officer for 33 years and who knew from a great distance how to read what he was looking at. He had registered, in approximately 2 seconds, the following: a young white officer standing over a tall black man who was lying on the concrete in a position of obvious incapacitation, an empty taser cartridge on the ground, a leather wallet against the curb of pump number 4, a small navy blue case with a gold star and a sky blue ribbon visible against the gray of the concrete, a teenage girl with a phone, an elderly white man holding a gas pump nozzle with both of his hands raised slightly in front of him, as though he were not certain whether he was supposed to continue pumping, and a cashier and a Phillips 66 shirt standing in the open doorway of the convenience store, with both of her hands over her mouth. Chief Coleman did not in those 2 seconds register that the man on the ground was Wendell McKinley personally. He registered, however, the medal. He registered the ribbon. He had been raised by a father who had served in Korea. He had been a police officer for 33 years. He knew, with the unambiguous and immediate clarity of recognition that some objects in the world produce in some people, exactly what he was looking at. He continued walking. He did not draw his weapon. He did not raise his voice. He stopped approximately 4 feet from Officer Bramlett. He said in a voice that was neither loud nor quiet, but that carried with the particular tonal frequency of a senior officer addressing a junior one, "Officer, step away from the civilian." Now, Officer Bramlett turned. He saw Chief Coleman. He had not at first recognized him out of uniform, because in the 3 years and 4 months he had been on the force, he had seen Chief Coleman in person exactly twice, once at his graduation from the academy, and once at a department-wide briefing 8 months earlier. He recognized him approximately 1 second after the order. He took a step backward. He said, Chief, the subject was. He reached for his pocket. I gave him a clear order. Officer, step away from the civilian. Officer Bramlett stepped away. Chief Coleman walked past him. He knelt slowly beside Wendell McKinley. He placed 2 fingers against the side of Wendell McKinley's neck. He registered a pulse. He registered that the man was breathing. He registered that there was a small but spreading pool of blood on the concrete beneath the man's head. He registered 6 inches from his right knee the open Medal of Honor case. He picked it up, slowly. He looked at the engraving inside the lid. He read the name and the year of presentation. He closed the case. He held it in his hand for approximately 3 seconds. He stood up. He turned to Officer Bramlett. He said in the same voice he had used a moment earlier, Officer Bramlett, what was your probable cause for this stop? Sir, a call came in. I just heard you tell the man on the ground that the call was about ATM tampering. There was no call from this address all afternoon. I came from a meeting at Pleasant Grove. I monitored the radio the entire drive. There was no call. What was your probable cause? Sir, I observed. Officer, what was your probable cause? Officer Bramlett did not answer. The cashier in the doorway of the convenience store began to weep, very quietly. The teenage girl at pump number 6 continued to record. The elderly white man at pump number 2 slowly hung up his gas pump nozzle and walked with great deliberation to a position approximately 6 feet behind Chief Coleman, where he stopped and stood and watched. Chief Anthony Coleman looked at Officer Bramlett for a long moment. He looked at the unconscious man on the ground. He looked at the Medal of Honor case in his own hand. He looked at the teenage girl with the phone. He looked at the cashier in the doorway. He looked at the elderly white man. He looked back at Officer Bramlett. Officer Bramlett, as of this moment on this scene, you are relieved of your duty. You will surrender your service weapon, your badge, and your radio to me right now. You will not return to your cruiser. You will not return to the precinct. A supervisor will be here in approximately 7 minutes to take your statement and to escort you to internal affairs, where you will sit and you will wait. You are terminated for cause, effective immediately, pending the formal proceedings that will follow. I am giving you this order in front of these witnesses and on the body cameras that I assume are still recording. And I am giving it to you not because I have the patience or the time to walk you through the 7 different ways you violated this department's policies and the state of North Carolina's use of force laws in the last 60 seconds, but because the man at your feet is a Medal of Honor recipient, and I will not stand on this concrete and watch the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department fail him by failing to act in this moment with the clarity that the moment requires. Do you understand me? Officer Bramlett did not at first move. His mouth was slightly open. His face had drained of color in a single fast wash from forehead to chin. He looked at Chief Coleman. He looked at the man on the ground. He looked at the medal in Chief Coleman's hand. He understood, in stages, what was happening to him. He nodded. Once he reached for the buckle of his duty belt. He withdrew his service weapon, slowly, with his trigger finger visibly extended away from the trigger guard, and handed it to Chief Coleman, but first. He unclipped his badge. He handed it over. He unclipped his shoulder radio. He handed that over. He stood in the middle of the gas station parking lot with the empty leather pouches of his duty belt visible where his badge and his weapon had been. The ambulance arrived at 4:53 p.m. The paramedics moved Wendell McKinley onto a backboard with the quiet professional speed of people who had been trained to handle head injuries. Chief Coleman handed the Medal of Honor case to the lead paramedic, a woman named Tia Wilson, and asked her to ensure it traveled with the patient to the hospital. Tia Wilson, who had served 4 years in the United States Marine Corps before becoming a paramedic, took the case with both of her hands. She placed it carefully on the gurney next to Wendell McKinley's right hip. She nodded at Chief Coleman. She closed the back doors of the ambulance. The ambulance pulled out of the parking lot at 4:56 p.m. Within 48 hours, Madison Patel's video had been viewed approximately 84 million times across TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. The Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department had released the body camera footage from Officer Bramlett's camera and from Chief Coleman's lapel camera. The body camera footage corroborated every visible element of Madison Patel's video and added the additional element of Officer Bramlett's audible heavy breathing in the seconds before he drew his taser, which use of force experts on cable news would later identify as evidence of self-induced adrenaline escalation in the absence of any external threat. The U.S. Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division announced a federal investigation into the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department's training and supervision practices. The Charlotte City Council voted unanimously to commission an outside review of the department's internal affairs procedures, with particular attention to the handling of complaints filed by Black and Latino civilians. Officer Cody Bramlett was charged by the Mecklenburg County District Attorney's Office with felony assault with a deadly weapon, deprivation of rights under color of law, and falsification of a police report. He was eventually convicted on all 3 counts. He was sentenced to 4 years in state prison. The Internal Affairs lieutenant who had closed his prior complaints was placed on administrative leave and retired under pressure 6 weeks later. Wendell McKinley spent 4 days at Atrium Health Carolina's medical center, recovering from a moderate concussion, 3 stitches and a laceration above his left ear, and second-degree taser burns on his ribcage and abdomen. He was discharged on the afternoon of the 4th day. He was visited in the hospital by Chief Anthony Coleman on the morning of the 2nd day. The 2 men spoke quietly for approximately 47 minutes in Wendell's hospital room with Constance present. The substance of their conversation was not, by either man's choice, disclosed publicly. Chief Coleman did, however, ask Wendell McKinley a single specific question before he left, which was whether Wendell would consider speaking at a series of training sessions for the department's recruits in the coming year. Wendell McKinley said he would think about it. He said yes 10 days later. He spoke at the first training session 3 months later. He told the recruits, in his quiet, careful voice, what had happened to him at the Phillips 66 station off Sharon Amity Road, and what had happened to him in eastern Afghanistan in July of 2008. He told them that those 2 events were connected, and that the connection was the same thing in both cases. A young man with a weapon making a decision in a fraction of a second about the value of another human being's life. He told them he did not have an answer for why some men in that fraction of a second made the decision that protected, and other men in that same fraction of a second made the decision that destroyed. He told them he was here on a Wednesday afternoon talking to 46 recruits because the question itself was worth being asked out loud by him to them before they went out and put on a uniform and carried a weapon and had to make the decision themselves. 3 years after the incident, Chief Anthony Coleman retired from the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. He had served 36 years. The new chief, a woman named Renee Vasquez, who had been the assistant chief under Coleman, kept the recruit training program Wendell McKinley had begun. Wendell McKinley was at the time of Chief Coleman's retirement, 61 years old. He still worked at the small nonprofit. He still drove the 2019 Toyota 4Runner. The small navy blue leatherette case, which had been returned to him at the hospital on the morning of his discharge, sat on the top shelf of the bookcase in his living room, beside a framed photograph of his 2 daughters at the youngest one's college graduation. He did not, after the day at the gas station, carry the case on his person again. He did not need to. The case had done on a single afternoon at a Phillips 66 station off Sharon Amity Road, the only public work it had ever been required to do in his life. He sat sometimes in his living room on a quiet weekend afternoon with a cup of coffee and looked at the case on the top shelf of the bookcase. He thought about the men whose names were on the wall of the one-at memorial at Fort Bragg, 9 of whom had not come home from eastern Afghanistan in July of 2008. He thought about Chief Anthony Coleman, who had stood on the concrete of a gas station parking lot and refused, in a single moment, to allow an institution he had given 33 years of his life to fail one more time. He thought about his wife, Constance, who at that moment was reading a novel on the back porch in a yellow sundress, with the late afternoon light coming through the kitchen window and falling across the rug at his feet. He drank his coffee. He set the cup down. The afternoon continued, ordinary and quiet, in the unremarkable way most afternoons continued in the brick ranch house in East Charlotte, where Wendell McKinley had built. With great care over many years and at the cost of much that he had nearly not survived, the small ordinary life that was, in the end, the thing he had come home to live.